I think everyone can see my screen. Again, thank you very much for having me. So I will be speaking today about the integration between Clustermarket and RSpace. To give you all an overview of what I will be presenting today, I will present and start the presentation with mentioning some of the capabilities of the integration. I will mention about the data collection efforts and of course about the benefits of the integrations as well. So here you can see a snapshot of the integration we have done with RSpace. So as Rory mentioned, Clustermarket is an equipment scheduling asset management solution in which you would be able to book the scientific equipment and be able to have an overview of all the activities inside the lab. The integration we have created with RSpace allows you to document and add all the information on your workflow, such as the equipment details and your booking details. So here you can see all those information related to your instruments and the bookings that you have created. It would be great if everyone can mute themselves. Thank you very much. Another integration, so the way the integration has been developed is where you would be able to record the equipment details and the booking details, but also be able to book the instruments from your electronic lab notebook, which is the RSpace in this case. So here you would be able to add tables on your integration, on your workflow, and it will allow you to book the equipment from your electronic lab notebook. Whenever we speak with different lab leaders, one of the operational challenges that a lot of people have mentioned is the fact that there is a lack of data when it comes to operational management. So with Clustermarket, it helps you to collect specific data related to your equipment usage, but also about the equipment health data. About the equipment data, which would be able to collect with Clustermarket as, of course, the information about the equipment, and of course, the usage data as well. So something that it helps you with is in making informed purchasing decisions on instruments, such as you would be able to have a reporting of how heavily instruments are being used in the lab, and it gives you that equipment utilization on your instrument usage. Not only on usage, but also on maintenance. So you would be able to see on Clustermarket, on the report functionality, where it collects the data, you would be able to see how often a specific instrument is undergoing a specific maintenance, such as preventive maintenance, breakdown, and have that all reported. So this is very crucial for every stage of the company, academia, industry, any place and sector. One other point that has been mentioned is whenever I speak with different people, they always mention that having different tools is definitely not something they like to do in the lab. There is already a lot of tools being used. So creating a seamless process is something we at Clustermarket aim. So you would be able, some of the benefits here, as I mentioned, with having an integration with an ELN solution, is that it will help you in importing and exporting data. You would be able to document processes and having an improved workflow. So as I mentioned, being able to book the equipment from your electronic notebook, being able to record the booking details and the equipment details in your electronic lab notebook helps with a lot of improvements on the workflow for researchers and results to a better reproducible results of your experiments. So that's all from my side. If there is any questions, I believe we can have at the end some Q&A session where everyone can ask their questions. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Marcel. That's a good way to kick things off. I think that sets the scene very well. So Rolf and Marcus, over to you now.
Yeah, hi. So I will share my screen. So I'm Rolf Karl from Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin für Material und Energie. But here in that webinar, I speak as a representative of the Persistent Identification of Instruments working group in the Research Data Alliance. And we agreed that I would give a short introduction to persistent identifiers in general first. And I would start with an example. If we look at, I took some arbitrary literature reference. And if you look at that, so at least I'm still already old enough to remember how tedious it was to look up these kinds of references. You would need to search up the journal web page, understand how its archive is organized, look up the issues and all that. So that all that is very tedious and error prone. And obviously that nowadays everybody uses DOIs, and this task this now becomes trivial thanks to persistent identifiers, or in that case, DOIs. Still, if you want to identify the authors of that article, doing that by name is often ambiguous, and you have name changes and all that. And also that can be solved by adding the ORCID IDs of the authors. So each of these green bubbles here is a link to the ORCID profile, and that way we can unambiguously identify these authors and also find related works by the same authors. So what is a persistent identifier? Usual thing, if you want to explain a term, you first look up into Wikipedia and how they define it. It is a long-lasting reference to a document, file, web page, or other object. And so persistent identifier should identify some well-defined thing, be it a publication, a person, an object, whatever. It should be globally unique. It should be resolvable, and it should be persistent. And as I already said, there are many PIDs for many things: publications, data, people, research organizations, samples, software, and now instruments, and a lot of more. In short, whenever you want to reference something in an unambiguous, reliable, and lasting manner, you want to use a PID. One side remark: the persistence in the PID is not a technical property, it is a social contract. This is important to keep in mind. Persistent identifiers are usually registered with some metadata about the thing that the PID refers to. And these metadata, so that is a PID record. And this PID record should provide at least enough information about the thing so that you can understand what it is. And that PID record should be machine readable. And one particular properties in that PID records is references to other related things. So for instance, a journal article would reference other articles it cites. It would reference the authors of that article, including the affiliations, and might cite the data that that article is based upon. Similar, a data set might reference the sample that has been measured, if it is a measurement, the software used to process the data, or the instrument being used to collect the data. And so that so far for PIDs in general. Now for persistent identifiers for instruments. So what do we mean by instruments? It should be, we consider instruments operated in the science to make measurements and to collect data. And we mean the individual physical instances, so not the type of instruments or the model. The motivation to introduce PIDs for instruments should already be clear from the last slide. So we want to be able to link data to the instruments that generated them in order to give some provenance information for that data. We want to allow to link technical description or maybe specifications of the instruments from that PID record. And that way we can allow automatic aggregation of information. So if you have a data set and that it links to its instrument PID, and that instrument PID in turn links some technical information about that instrument, you have much richer metadata from your data set. And another application would be if you have a data set, then you might want to search for other data that has been collected from the same instruments. For instance, you might want to find calibration data from that instrument. And of course, that you can do by following these PID references. The other way around, we as instrument providers, of course, we are very keen to track the scientific output of an instrument. And of course, that can also be done using these PIDs. As I said, I represent the Persistent Identification of Instruments working group. That was a working group in the Research Data Alliance. And what it did was it collected use cases, and based on these use cases, we formulated a metadata schema for the information to put into the PID record for instruments. And we explored potential solutions with existing PID infrastructures. And we tried out two candidates that both worked very well, that are handles from EPIC and DOIs from DataSite. And finally, at the end, I want to just show you, say, a practical example how we do it at Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin. We operate a synchrotron light source, and we decided to use DOIs for our instrument PIDs, and we attribute DOIs to the beamlines and the experimental stations of our synchrotron. And of course, we need to provide the landing page for these instruments. But in that case, we could leverage an existing instrument database that we have in our house that is used in the user portal. And so we can just reuse these instrument pages. Here you see an example as a landing pages for the instruments. And here you see an example for one of our instruments, the P-axis. And finally, I wanted to show an example how we can link data sets with that instruments. So here you see an example of a publication, of a dataset publication landing page. And you can link the instrument from the DataSite metadata that is registered with that data publication. And in the current schema, we use a related identifier with relation type is compiled by. And here you see an example. So you have that in the metadata that you can look up, but also in the landing page, you have a link to that instrument. But as a sneak preview, the next version of DataSite metadata schema 4.5, I heard at least rumors that it's about to release in early next year. It will provide a completely new relation type exactly for that use case that would then be is collected by. And that is all that I wanted to say. I have a few more references to look into things on my last slide.
I'm just saying hi for now. I will be here for the Q&A. So I'm Markus Stocker. I'm with the TIB Libraries Information Center for Science and Technology in Hanover, also known as the headquarters of DataScience, maybe more internationally. No, I'm heading there the Knowledge Infrastructure Research Group and co-chairing a project called Open Research Knowledge Graph, which looks at the verification of scientific knowledge expressed in articles as a kind of research data. And of course, I'm co-chairing also the RDA, Persistent Identification of Instruments working group. So I will hand over back to you, Rory, and I will stay put for the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcus. So thanks. I think that hopefully the first two presentations have set the scene nicely for the third presentation. We've seen very briefly how Clustermarket and RSpace work together to combine experimental record in an electronic lab notebook with the details relating to the usage of equipment that went into the experiment. Then Rolf has given us I thought, a fantastically clear and concise but full picture about PIDs, and specifically about PIDs for instruments. And I'm now going to pass over to Vida, who's going to talk about a recent integration of another kind of PID, but also a PID relating to physical things, the new International Generic Sample Number ID, IGSNs, into the RSpace sample management system, and then maybe ask some questions about how what has been done with IGSNs might be relevant in some respects to thinking about incorporating the new PIDs for instruments into tools like RSpace and Clustermarket. So Vida, over to you.
So I'm going to be talking a little bit about research workflows and the work we've been doing with IGSNs and how that could possibly extend to PIDs. Let me just, sorry, it's not highlighting the full thing. Oh well. My name is Vida, and I work in product and user research at ResearchSpace. So my focus really is on talking to users, whether that's researchers or research data managers, or anyone else involved in the research process, such as data curators or data stewards, and trying to understand what their needs are so that we are able to define clearly what it is we're trying to build, and then actually build a feature that fits their needs, which involves a lot of talking and ideating and back and forth, but it is still a very rewarding process. As mentioned, RSpace is an ELN and an inventory product, and we focus on integrations because the focus of RSpace is that you probably already have a lot of tools you're using or that you want to use, so there's no point in making you use only one specific siloed tool, and instead it's important to integrate with everything around. So that's quite important for institutional research data management. So IGSN IDs are physical sample PIDs, and RSpace inventory focuses on sample and inventory management. And we decided, as part of a EOSC RDA grant project that explored interoperability in research platforms, to do a project that links both. So we collaborated with DataCite, as they provide the backend for IGSN IDs, as they are technically DOIs. And we collaborated with a couple of research organizations that worked with field research and geosamples. And the focus of the project was to really understand what their physical sample workflows were, and so what their requirements for PIDs were, and also to build a prototype IGSN integration in inventory that then actually enables that use case that they needed fulfilled. And as part of that, we also identified pain points of collaborating between different stakeholders around PIDs, such as people having different languages that they use, or clarification needed about specific vocabulary. For example, like landing pages, where are they hosted? What are they? What should they include? And so that was really valuable. So the main question we wanted to answer was, how would someone, and that can be different types of people, how would someone use a research tool that integrates PIDs to PIDify their active research, their research or outputs, or their samples, their instruments? And in this case, we decided to focus specifically on samples because we couldn't address just everything in one go. And this project obviously had a limited timeline. And so we thought, okay, let's try to solve one specific thing of taking IGSNs and RSpace inventory and field research. And so trying to see how PIDs work in the context of a real research workflow. And I can't stress enough how important it was to get the feedback from the different institutions, both Rothamsted and UIT, to be able to compare how these workflows generalize and to understand what the different requirements were and what the kind of conflicts in terms of the needs of different people were, and that was really, I think, really useful. So I'm going to do a quick demo of the IGSN's integration, and you can actually try it out yourself. You can sign up to our demo server and head over to the inventory tab to explore this. It's up all the time, so you can do that at any point. All right, you should be able to see my inventory screen. Well, actually, it's the ELN, so I hope you're paying attention. Yeah. So here we have the workspace. So what Morsel demonstrated was the actual ELN Clustermarket integration, where you're able to input information and view information in terms of the bookings, and this would take place in this space. But if you head over into inventory, this is where you do your sample management. So you can see here we have a left column with some different sections. You have then this left section that has a list of different items that you might have, let's say on your bench right now. And then on the right, you have the actual metadata about that item. So things such as the parent sample, the location of this item, and let's say its actual custom fields. So if I take something like, let's say, like some of these, if I create a new sample, for example, I can choose a template, like an antibody template, right? And I can fill in the custom fields based on a template that, let's say, one of my lab managers created, to make sure that there's some consistency and there's already some pretty well-defined metadata that is being input into the system. Right, now you'll notice here, and I'll probably actually go into our a single panel view, which is good if you're working, say, on mobile, just so you're able to see better. There's this identifier section. So if you click on that, you can create a new identifier. So right away on every type of item in inventory, you can directly mint an IGSN for it to associate with it. So I click on that, and it explains to me what the state, that the corresponding data state essentially is, so that users are aware of, okay, what's going to be public right now. Right now, nothing's going to be public. It's just a draft. You get a temporary identifier. You get some information of what identifier you minted. And then you get some pre-populated values for the required properties. And these are all pulled in from things we already know. Like we know the name of the person who created the sample. We know the publisher based on the RSpace instance and so on. And because we pre-populate all the required properties, this means that the researcher has to do the least amount of work possible to start pushing something out to public. And you can also fill in some additional metadata that's recommended by DataCite for samples. So geolocations being a big one, as well as some others such as subject, description, alternate identifier. Just to show you, when I'm going into edit mode here, I can add some geolocation information, and that can be, let's say, the name of a place. If it's like a rough location, it can also be a bounding box, or it could be a latitude, or even like a polygon, which is what you would see on like a real estate website that would actually show you, let's say, on which specific plot of land or which specific farm you collected these samples from. So that's pretty handy. Let's just not save anything for now. And you can delete this for now, because the IGSN has not been fully registered yet. It's still in the draft state. So you've pre-registered because you knew you wanted an IGSN, but you decided you don't want it anymore. So you can just delete the identifier, and that will completely remove it from the item and delete that draft. But if you want, and you're ready to showcase, let's say, some of the metadata publicly, you can first preview the landing page, which will show you what information will be included on the public landing page, which in this case is mostly just the core metadata, a little card here, just making sure that people are aware that this is a physical object. Here's the actual identifier, here's its name, and at the bottom some information about who you should get in touch with if, let's say, you want more information. Click on publish, and here we make sure that the user is aware that data will be public, so they can make edits to this sample and do their active research and edit the metadata, but the publish action is an explicit act that they have to confirm. So now we get an update on the state of this IGSN, which is important to have that additional information to make sure the user is aware of what exactly has happened just now, as well as providing some extensive documentation on how the feature works and providing the landing page link. So if I open that, you have now a public URL that you don't need to log into, and that is just posted publicly. And this is what the DOI actually then resolves to. I mean, here I'm using a test server, the DataCite test server, so it doesn't actually look all nice. But if you're using a production server, then it's you get a DOI that redirects to this resource, and this system administrator can set up the DataCite integration and can select whether they want to use a test server for a bit, whether they want a production server, but the researcher themselves doesn't need to see any of that stuff happening in the back end. So let's say if I actually go into the DataCite back end, I can have a look and I can reload the page, and you can see that my antibody has been registered here. You can see when it's been created, you can see some information, not a lot, obviously, because I didn't fill it in, but it is all then collected by DataCite, and DataCite is then able to provide a nice search interface and includes this PID in the PIDs graph if it's got, let's say, related identifiers it's linked with. So that's really useful. And you can also retract if you decided, oh no, like I published something I really shouldn't have. You can retract the information, and that means that now your landing page will, let me see, will just give like a response that this item is not really available just now. And we'll add some information as well that, you should probably get in touch either with the institution or the owner. So I think that's mostly it. So I'll go back to my slides. Whoop. Let's see. Yeah, so what's next for this integration? I think what's interesting is that there were a lot of things to balance in terms of how generalizable to make this integration, which features to include for the very core version. And we're not yet even looking at things like, let's say, domain-specific metadata and how to support that. So it's definitely an iterative process, and we definitely need the help of communities of practice to be able to implement this properly. And one thing we know that is going to be definitely very useful is publishing domain sample metadata that you have in your item in RSpace, but that doesn't match to the IGSN schema, because it's either too obscure or too specific, or you just want to display a lot of properties that maybe wouldn't be maybe even appropriate to be searchable. And so being able to select which items you want to add onto the landing page alongside your PID friendly metadata is one feature we're working on, as well as map previews for geolocations, so that instead of just having the list of coordinates, you can easily locate where a specific sample is just by looking at a little map embed, as well as making sure that IGSNs integrates with repositories. So let's say you have a document and you've added a list of materials to it, meaning that you've associated some samples to it because you're exploring a specific protocol and you've written up the protocol and you said, okay, I've used these 3 samples for this experiment, and you export this experiment to Dataverse. It makes sense that the metadata, at least the GUI of those samples, should really be part of the Dataverse export as well. So trying to make sure that PIDs are sent out and linked with research outputs as closely as possible. You might be interested in the interoperability guideline that we wrote up as part of the IGSNs project, that explores more of the process of it and the recommendations we have for how to approach implementing PIDs at a research institution level. And when it comes to what's next for PIDs at RSpace, we're working on various things, and more importantly, the interactions between them as well. So RORs, the research organization PIDs, and making sure that the information from RORs is passed down to DOI or IGSN metadata. So when someone publishes, it's clear that they are part of this institution and their ORCID is this, and DOIs as well, project identifiers, ontology support, and PIDs, which you might have heard about. And so when it comes to PIDs for instruments and research workflows, I guess I kind of tricked you a little bit because I don't have all the answers myself. So this talk is more about asking for your thoughts. So I'm definitely very interested in the Q&A and the discussion section, and you can email me as well. And I hope that the IGSN's use case was and the Clustermarket demonstration of how the integration works there and what is collected, what it's used for, has given you some ideas of how specific tools are able to integrate together to support research workflow, and perhaps how could we use those as an example for exploring research workflow built around, let's say, PIDs and RSpace and Clustermarket. What would that actually look like? And I also have just some ideas just to maybe just help out to start off the discussion, mostly centered around, well, what would your workflow look like? What do you imagine yourself doing that would involve then pulling in PIDs, and how would that look like? So for example, I can imagine someone working in RSpace inventory and deciding that they want to quickly log that they've obtained a certain instrument, and they're able to search an external PIDs for instruments repository and automatically import all the metadata of that instrument into RSpace rather than having to manually type that in. Or you could keep track of which sample metadata measurements are taken by a specific instrument because you associate the PIDs to it. Or you could directly register a PIDs for an instrument in inventory and provide persistent information about it. Or perhaps a lab technician would use both PIDs and the search filters in RSpace inventory to find, let's say, all instruments that have a fault and need repair, and they would, through the PIDs metadata schema, would find the exact manufacturer and there's the exact contact details of who they need to get in touch with. When it comes to Clustermarket, you could capture the usage and uniquely identify a specific instrument and how it's been used through Clustermarket, and then go back into inventory and adjust how often it's being maintained, for example, or even have that be automatic. So these are the kind of flow of consciousness ideas that I could think of, but I hope this was useful and that my very speedy demo did make at least half sense. And I think I'll hand it over back to Rory. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Vaya. That was excellent. Just a great way to kind of bring together the various themes that that we're focusing on in this session.